Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping straight into 1 Timothy chapter 1.
That's right. We're looking at this letter from Paul to Timothy.
And our goal is really to unpack what Paul was getting at here. The core message for Timothy back then and, well, what it might mean for us.
Definitely. And the context is key. Paul's left Timothy in Ephesus, a major city, and there are challenges cropping up in the church, specifically around teaching.
Okay, let's get into that. Paul starts right off, doesn't he? He says, stay there in Ephesus so that you may command certain people not to teach false doctrines any longer.
Pretty direct.
Very direct. There's clearly an issue that needs addressing immediately.
So what were these false doctrines? What was the problem?
He mentions myths and endless genealogies. Now, that might sound a bit obscure to us.
Yeah, what does that even mean?
Well, the specifics aren't fully detailed, but Paul's reason for calling them out is crystal clear. He says they promote controversies rather than God's work, which is by faith. Okay, so it's less about the content, maybe, and more about the effect. They were causing arguments, not building faith.
Precisely. It's a really useful filter, isn't it? Does this discussion, this teaching, actually lead people towards genuine faith and God's work, or does it just, stir the pot, create debates?
That makes sense. And he adds that some people doing this wanted to be teachers of the law, but they didn't actually understand it. They were confident, but wrong.
Yeah, meaningless talk, he calls it. They didn't grasp what they're talking about or what they so confidently affirm. It's that classic confident ignorance problem.
Okay, so that's the problem to shut down. What's the positive vision? What's Timothy supposed to aim for instead?
Love. Simple as that, really. Paul says the goal of this command is love.
Well, love, okay.
But then he specifies where that love comes from. A pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. That's the foundation.
Pure heart, good conscience, sincere faith, leading to love. Got it.
That's the benchmark for any worthwhile teaching or guidance.
So, speaking of the law, since those false teachers were apparently misusing it, is the law itself bad?
No, not at all. Paul tackles that head on. We know that the law is good, he says, if one uses it properly. The key is proper use.
Right, proper use. And how does he define that?
He says it's made not for the righteous, but for lawbreakers and rebels. And then he gives this pretty intense list.
Yeah, I remember that. Ungodly, sinful, unholy, irreligious, people who kill parents, murderers, adulterers, perverts, slave traders, liars, perjurers.
Exactly. It goes on basically anyone acting contrary to sound doctrine and the gospel.
So the law isn't primarily for good people trying to be better. It's more like guardrails or a mirror for those completely off track.
That's a great way to put it. It exposes sin, restrains evil. It functions in light of the gospel's grace, not as an alternative path to righteousness. It shows why grace is needed.
Okay. And this idea of grace leads right into Paul's own story, which he includes here. It's quite powerful.
Incredibly powerful, he says. Even though I was once a blasphemer and a persecutor and a violent man, he doesn't mince words about his past.
But he was shown mercy. Why? What reason does he give?
Because, he says, he acted in ignorance and unbelief. It wasn't a fully informed, deliberate rejection, despite how terrible his actions were.
That's an interesting distinction. And the purpose of this mercy.
This is amazing. He says it was so that in me, the worst of sinners, Christ Jesus might display his unlimited patience as an example.
An example? Wow. So his own life becomes Exhibit A for God's patience, for anyone else who might believe later on.
Exactly. Proof that nobody is beyond hope, which ties into that famous line he quotes.
The trustworthy saying?
Yes. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the worst. He owns it completely. It highlights that the gospel is fundamentally about rescue for those who know they need it.
So, bringing this all back to Timothy's task, what's the final charge based on all this?
Paul tells him to fight the good fight, and crucially, to hold on to faith and a good conscience, those two things together.
Faith and a good conscience. And what happens if you let go of those?
Well, Paul warns that some have rejected these and so have shipwrecked their faith.
Shipwrecked? That's a strong image. He even names names, right? Hymenaeus and Alexander.
He does. It shows how serious the consequences are. Losing that grounding in faith and conscience can lead to, well, total disaster spiritually.
Okay, so reflecting on this whole chapter.
Yeah.
We've got identifying bad teaching by its fruit. Does it cause controversy or build faith? Understanding the law's true purpose. Paul's testimony of mercy. The need for faith and a good conscience. How does this connect to us, today? We're bombarded with information, too.
I think it gives us really practical tools. We have to ask, is this thing I'm reading, hearing, or even sharing actually building love? Is it rooted in sincerity? Or is it just generating heat, not light? Divisiveness.
Right. Focusing on the outcome, the effect on faith and love.
And the point about the law reminds us that rules and structures have a place, but they aren't the ultimate goal. They often serve to point out the problem or restrain the worst, leading us to something deeper, like grace.
And Paul's story, that's just huge, isn't it? The potential for change, for mercy, no matter what. But it requires holding on to that faith and actively keeping a clear conscience.
Absolutely. It's a call to humility and hope.
So maybe the final thought for us listening is this. Thinking about Paul's criteria, how do we personally sort through all the stuff out there? How do we actively choose what nourishes real faith and genuine love, and consciously avoid what just distracts or divides?
That's the challenge, isn't it? Applying that filter consistently.